Hi, everybody. I'm Mitra Sapienza. I'm the Student Equity Coordinator. I'm really excited that all of you are here today. Thank you. I know it's a work day. I'm excited also that we have our very own City College of San Francisco colleagues that are presenting today. Our first panel is from our Puente program. So give us a few minutes and we'll get them started.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Woo! It's nice to see so many Puente supporters in the room. So we are here, we're part of the Puente program here at City College, and I'm Amy Miles. I'm an English instructor at the Mission Center cohort.
I'm Karen Cox. I'm the English instructor at the Ocean cohort.
I'm Nicola German. I'm the counselor at the Ocean cohort.
I'm Adriana Rivera. I'm the counselor at the Mission cohort.
And I'm Rachel Cohen. I am the ESL language support faculty in the Mission cohort.
So our talk today, our panel, we're talking about how Puente closes the achievement gap. And how many of you know about Puente? Yes. How many of you have been Puente mentors at some point? Yes, so thank you. Part of the reason why we close the gap is because of the amazing work that you do to support us and to support our students. But for those of you that maybe don't know about Puente or that wanted a little bit of reminder of what the program is about, is that Puente started over 35 years ago. How long, maybe even longer than that, 37, 38, Nixara knows all the details. 38 years ago at Chabot College. And at Chabot College, at that time, an English instructor and a counselor were looking and thinking, like, there's all these Latino students who aren't transferring to four-year schools. What's going on? And so I love this image. At that time, the counselor and the English instructor, they went through transcripts. So this is before Banner, right, where they're paper transcripts, and they're going through the transcripts, and they discover that the reason why students weren't transferring is because they were avoiding their English teachers or English classes and avoiding counseling. And so to kind of look at that, so this is kind of one of the issues that's keeping these first generation students from transferring. They developed this program in the Puente Model, which combines English, counseling, and realizing that students needed more support beyond just the academic environment, the campus environment. They felt very strongly about having a third layer of mentors in the community, those that have that were first generation college students and that could really help support and guide the students as they work to finish their English courses and work on their ed plans and transfer to four-year schools. So that's a really important piece. And at City College, Puente has been here for 31 years, right? So 31 years. We have two cohorts, one here at the Mission, one here at the Mission, that's where I am, so I always think here at the Mission. One here at the Ocean campus, and 5 years ago, a cohort moved to the Mission campus. And at the Mission campus, we started with 16 students. Every year, it got bigger, and now we're up to a full cohort. So that's been a really exciting part in the Mission district also. And then the other really important piece that I think helps. The Puente model is not just about English counseling and mentoring. A really important piece of Puente is about having culturally relevant pedagogy. And so that we really look at the students looking at who they are and what their cultural strengths are. And we do that with a pedagogy of cariño and caring and really building safe spaces for the students to reflect on who they are and what they bring to the educational space and how they can use that to write their way into whatever schools they want to go to and do that as leaders. So that's a little bit about the background of our Puente program in the community colleges. There are also, for those that are interested to know, there are also programs in middle schools and high schools. So there is a I don't want to use the word bridge, right? A successive bridge in the community.
All right, thank you, Amy. Sorry, I think our PowerPoint is not working, but we're ready to move forward. Sorry about that. The mission of the Puente Project is to increase the number of educationally underserved students. So the goal is to enroll students at four-year colleges and universities, earn college degrees, as well as return as former Puentistas to our community and serve as mentors. So that's coming basically full circle, and we have a lot of students in our pipeline, right? And we have many that have transferred on. So the hope is that if and when they come back to this area, and if not to San Francisco, anywhere within California, Texas, state of Washington, that's where our programs are, that they can serve as mentors and be able to model what they have done to succeed with other students. So let's see if we can make this work. All right, so this is what the three interlinking rings look like. This was actually developed on a napkin by the two founders, right? So that was Felix and Patricia. And they came up with these three interlinking rings. So it's making sure that students are engaging in academic counseling, as well as making sure that they are enrolling in college-level English classes and remaining until they are able to succeed within them. And then, of course, the mentoring piece, which is where we bring in the community for us, whether it is our colleagues that are sitting in this room, those that unfortunately are not here joining us, or others that are in the outer community outside of our college. And they all interlink and they all interface. So there is constant dialogue between all of us to ensure that the students are moving forward. So this brings me to the counselor component. As counselors within the Puente Project, we are responsible for recruiting students to be able to self-select into the program. The program is open to all students, so it's not just Latinx. We have quite a diverse student population within our program. And we also recruit the mentors. So sometimes we have mentors that continue to go on, and so maybe recruitment isn't as big in that piece. In addition to that, we also help to co-coordinate the different events that we have throughout the academic year, and that's in conjunction with our English faculty, as well as Rachel. And so it's a collaborative effort that occurs at that point amongst both cohorts. In addition to that, and this is probably the most important piece why we're here, we support our students, right? We want to ensure that our students are ready, and even when they think they're not ready, they're ready because they're here, right? They took the scariest step, which is to actually be in an institution of higher education. And, sometimes I think part of our job is to remind them that they are scholars, that this is college, even though it's community college. They are in college, because there's that myth that sometimes they feel this isn't a real experience, but it very much is. And for us, it's not coming from a deficit perspective. It's actually having them rise to the occasion, that they have what it takes to be here, to succeed, and to be able to move on and achieve those goals and their dreams that we have them do assignments over. And that means that they have to reflect, that they have to look forward, that they have to kind of look deep down inside and figure out who do they want to be? What do they want to do? How do they want to impact society? So often enough, some of those assignments can be a bit challenging for students because they are engaging in skill set that perhaps they don't do quite a bit of, and it's always go, 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 and they never stop to smell the roses, so to speak, right? So a lot of reflection and a lot of planning goes into it. We help them to devise their educational plans, talk about future goals, reminding them to take a day at a time, And before we know it, we're at that point where they're asking, are you going to be at graduation, right? Are you going to be at the commencement ceremony? And throughout the beginning, I guess throughout the middle of their academic journey, right, we go through ups and downs, right? There's highs and lows, but they make it through. And so part of our job is to support them, is to create that relationship that establishes trust. Because we're often not just looking at the academics, but we're also really helping them navigate outer forces that impact their academic journey. So we're busy, we're really busy, but we enjoy what we do. I feel energized when I'm able to take out my crystal ball, right? And we're able to solve a problem of some sort, help to push them so they can persist. And it's always bittersweet at the end because we've done our job, but then they're leaving, right? So it is a bittersweet experience, I believe, for all of us.
I'm one of the Puente English instructors in the program. Amy's the other, but I was thinking, looking at that slide, that it should say instructor, not teacher, because everyone in the program is a teacher. The counselors are teaching, the mentors are teaching, the students are teaching us, and they're teaching each other. We're all teachers and learners, and so, but my job is to get them through 1A and 1B. And actually, as I'm sure some of you have heard me say this in other venues, it's a unique pleasure to have students for a year. We don't have to squeeze all the learning into 17 and a half weeks, and we don't have to have a distinct end to that learning. We can imagine ourselves evolving as writers over a whole year. I try to do the writing assignments with the students because I say that we're all writers and it never gets easy, and that isn't to discourage them, but it's just to remind them that writing is hard for everyone, that there isn't some club that they haven't been invited to, that it's a challenge for all of us when we're writing. We recently did some poetry writing in class, and I didn't want to share mine, and then several students had gone, and then finally they goaded me to share, and one of them said, yeah, yours isn't the best. And I'm like, yeah, it's not. And it's important for them to feel like they also are teaching and learning. Some of the jobs that the English instructor have is to get the students through the learning outcomes, and so that is challenging because learning how to write a college essay is challenging. And so again, we have this whole year to practice it, in the fall with nonfiction and argument and research, in the spring with literature. One of our jobs on the English side, or the literature side, is to make sure that they're being exposed to and invited to learn about authors that they might not have learned about otherwise. And not just Latinx writers, but writers all over the spectrum. And if we're lucky, writers we can get to come here. So to read their poetry or to speak about their novel. Or if there's going to be an author at the motivational conference in the fall, we try to read that book. Because we want students to see these authors as living human beings like them. We want them to get a signature in a book if they can. We want them to experience literature and writing as exciting and as a community that they're part of, instead of something that they don't understand that they have to get through. I mean, they probably feel that way right now, finishing their papers with me, but we're hoping that they don't feel that way. We also, on the English side, we try to help support the counseling and mentoring side. So we try to have assignments that help them to reflect and explore as they're learning about their path and what they're going to do next. Career exploration, community awareness, activism. So we try to give them opportunities to write about those experiences. And then we help prepare them for the mentoring component, because it's a huge and important part of our program. And we need the students to be prepared and ready and excited to do that part. And it's scary to meet someone in the community and hang out with them and have coffee and go to their work. And so we want them to be ready for those experiences. And actually our mentors help us with that. We had a fantastic mentoring panel where the mentors did taught the students how to do an elevator talk about their why they should get a scholarship or why they should get accepted to their transfer institution. And I was nervous, and the students were nervous, and it was a fun evening. And so just having the students have those experiences, so I help prepare them for that. We read articles, and we do some writing and reflection and journaling in our classroom to prepare them for that relationship. And then I'm also a cheerleader for them, as Nixora was saying, we all are. And so a couple of weeks ago, I just said, we're going to finish strong, folks. We've got a month month left. Look around you. Whose hand are you going to grab? Who are you pulling over the finish line? Because we all have to pull each other over, and part of being a program is being a community, being a familia, and helping each other get through. So that's another role that I feel that we all do, but that's one that we can do in the English classroom.
So within the mentor component, which we feel that that's one of the key components that also makes our program, and it's because we have faculty, we have leaders from the community that really come out and support our students. The mentors not only support the students with like the leadership component, but they also support our students within our basic needs, which is something that we realize and our mentors realize that students need. As you saw a lot of hands going up, we said who here is a part of the Puente Familia, and it's part of the mentoring component, and a lot of you are. And it's something that's important for the student, and it's appreciated by us, the team, because we know that our students sometimes need that third phase or that third component of support. Our Puente mentors are definitely handpicked by our teams here. They're hand-selected to really meet the needs of the student. So our mentor component is really emphasized by the student needs. It's not by the needs of the mentor or the faculty. It's basically by the needs of the student, because that's where we're making the impact, and we're making sure that the students have all the support that they need and get that nudge to keep on moving forward. Our mentors are trained trained by us, and it's designed and reassigned so the mentors really understand who their mentee is, and that also the mentee understands who their mentors are. So they do activities such as Nixora mentioned, you can go have coffee, talk about an internship, talk about your current class load, how is that going? Some of our mentors are also counselors as well, and they're instructors, either here at this college or from another college. So they really get to put that second buy-in into like, oh, you're taking full-time classes, you're also working full-time, how are we gonna manage this? Is this the right opportunity for you to do this? So the mentoring component is really important in our program, and I feel that like we all keep on saying, that builds the familia concept of it, because we are really focusing on the student themselves and making sure that we fulfill their needs at that point. Within our also the other opportunities that we provide students that we think are important is the leadership opportunities that we provide in our Puente program. We do things as like motivational conferences once in the fall semester, which we gather over maybe 30,000 Puente students from 65 community colleges that come out to one UC, so they can feel that empowerment. That there's a bigger familia out there that's really looking forward to an event that it's motivational for them, and that's gonna make them those leaders for them to come back in our community. We have things like the Puente Club, the leadership conferences, and the writers conferences that happen in the summer. These are opportunities where our students can really demonstrate all the things that they've been learning within that year, but also demonstrates the things that probably they're not learning in the classroom, but they're learning outside of the classroom that make them leaders, right? So we have students that are parents, right? They're leaders in their household. We have students that have full-time jobs, right? That also makes them leaders. So these are things that students bring to the table that make them the leaders that they are. So the Puente program provides opportunities for them to do that. Within this leadership conferences or these leadership opportunities, our students really learn the art of building relationships and communications, which is really important. They learn how to identify, right, their strengths, and maybe work towards some of the things that are not their strengths, right? So sometimes students feel shy about doing a presentation, or they're shy about doing recruitment. And we have a lot of our students that say that they are, but once we have them rise to the occasion, they go ahead and do it with no problem. So we want to make sure we give these opportunities to the students because we know that the students are able to do it. We just need for them to believe in themselves, just like we believe in them. So we feel that's very important.
Okay.
You want to talk about one strategy?
Oh, yeah. Just a little bit about some of the strategies that we use. In particular, at the mission cohort, I have the special delight of being able to work on students' academic essays without being at all responsible for their grade. So I really appreciate that. One of the strategies that Amy and I have developed over the years is we do sort of a team teaching in the classroom. IBEST is Integrated Basic Education Skills Training, and we put either an ESL teacher or basic skills instructor into a content classroom. So traditionally it's not used in English, but I really wanted to work with Puente, so I figured out a way to make it work now. I actually thought that it was a really natural way of doing things, and really from an equity mindset of figuring out how a language learner who was, almost ready, right, for a transfer level English could really get it done with this extra layer of support. So one of the ways is through academic essay reading, where Amy will focus more on the content, and I will focus on language issues, and really helping them develop that academic muscle in terms of expressing themselves in a way that is expected, right, in an academic setting. So students will often, they'll get one color of marking from Amy and a different color from me, so they know where the feedback is coming from. So that's one strategy that we employ in the classroom.
So another strategy that our Puentistas kind of share, and that we are definitely focused on providing, is for our students to know of all of the resources that we have, especially here at City College, but not alone here, but the opportunities that we have outside of here. So resources like, some of our students don't know what the blue and gold for UC system is, right? So their mentality, their lack of finances would not allow them to go to a UC system because they don't know of all of these opportunities. So our focus is to really, really incorporate and embed all the resources that our college has, but not only our college, but all of the UCs and CSUs out there or outside in community building that they can do.
So another strategy, I think that is specific to Puente when we're talking about community building, is that a lot of learning happens outside the classroom. And what we do in Puente is that we have a lot of activities, probably at least once a month, that where we meet with our students either in mentor events, readings, field trips, and they're long days, especially the field trips. But the most recent one that we went on with our students, we went to Cal Day, and I have my backpack and my sunscreen, and giving the students sunscreen or giving them oranges, and that really establishes and reminds the students that they're in a safe, caring place. And then especially as an English instructor with students who have traditionally been traumatized through K through 12 in their writing, it's really essential to build that sense of community and trust. And if they trust me, then they're willing to show up to the page. They're willing to sit with me to develop a plan for how to do their work, right? They're willing to find additional resources that are going to help them work with how they're learning. And so I think those activities are essential so that the students can become writers. And just as an example of that, one of our students this last time said, at the end, she said, "I've never felt closer to you guys." And then she went on and she got an A on her final paper. And I think that she had that capability all year, but I think it gave her the final push to feel like, oh, like I want to do this. So I think that's an important piece.
I want to build on that because one of the things that the teams in each cohort do is we meet weekly, and it's kind of our DEFCON 5 meeting. Okay, what's happening with this person? What's happening with this person? I haven't seen this person, give them a call. And we strategize because part of keeping people in college is just letting them know that we want them to stay in college. And that, so we say at the very beginning of the year, things are going to come up, things are going to get in your way, and what's the plan? Like, what's the plan ahead of time for when things get in your way? Because we're going to hound you, but what's the plan? And so knowing that, for having the students know that there's someone in their corner that's excited for them to keep going, I think is a huge, it seems that it's just a high-touch strategy. It's just, these people know you, we want you in, and we'll help you, and you don't get to disappear. And I think that's super important for students to feel that that's, that they're wanted here and expected here, and that we're going to help them get through.
All right, so we do hound them down. One of my students said, "Wow, I got summoned by you, and I'm here." I said, "Thank you." And it's just making sure that, like, where are you with your papers, and have you submitted it? And I haven't done anything, says the student. So little do they know, right, that I'm going to pick up that phone and I'm going to be like, "Hi, Karen, do you have a minute?" And I think it's beyond talking about what is that plan, but it's about putting it into action. And so often I am that bridge, right, to my partner, and I'll be like, "Karen, I have so-and-so here sitting with me. Can you guys discuss about a day and a time to meet, right, to talk about what is going to be the plan to get this paper done?" And so sometimes students have fears, right? There's so many fears that they have, but it's ultimately facing them. It's doing something about it. It's having somebody kind of pushing them along, right? Even when they resist a little bit. And sometimes I feel like they have a fear of success. It's not so much a failure, but it's of like success, right? That it's there, that they can grab it, that they can see it. But somewhere along the lines, they lose a little gas, right? And that's what we're there to do, to ensure that they get over the line, that they encounter that fear, that they get it done, that they're not so taken over by this, 10-page paper, right? Well, let's write a page a day, right? And then we will get to the outcome. So it's making sure that they know how to break things down, how to make it manageable, how to make it doable. But I do want to say that we all start out as strangers in this class, right? But they become so bonded that it's quite exciting to see them, see them like fish each other out of whatever ditch they're in and hiding, right, when they're not going to class, or, oh, we have an assignment today, and so there's just a lot of communication going on. So it's really beautiful to see that. And so I try to communicate with all of them as much as possible, and so I like linking them where a linkage, I guess, can be pointed out. So an example of that is as I was, seeing the students, many of them had communication studies on their plan. And I was like, so-and-so is taking this class next semester. You should talk to them and see, perhaps you could take the same one. Long story short, there's like 6 or 7 of them in one class. So it's that power of the familia within Puente that it's being incorporated in other aspects of their academic experience. And so communication studies for most people is very daunting, right? It's very scary to speak in public, but they have their community within that class. And I find that lovely. They educated that particular teacher about what Puente is, and she was fascinated by, what the program is and their energy in the class. And so that's a byproduct of what we do. So it's not just about how do our students survive within our environment, but it's empowering them to be able to use the skill set and strategies that they learn within our program and how they can employ them in other courses and beyond. So.
Okay, and I know we're getting close to the end, but I have a couple really special things that I want to mention. One really, really important thing, since we're here at the Equity Symposium, is to recognize the different ways that equity supports Puente and the different things that we are funded for through Puente, or through equity. One is a transportation scholarship. We also have a Puente Speaker Series where students are really able to see members of their community who have made it through. Last week we had Kathy Arellano who went to Mission High, who's a published poet. We also had Kim Davalos from Skyline College come and speak to us. Javier Huerta also did a poetry reading. Equity also funds our mentoring activities, and the iBest, which I do at Mission. And one of the things that through the team teaching that we do, because the three of us in our cohort, we consider ourselves to be the teaching team, and we're really able to model for students what it means to work out our biases, to look and challenge perceptions, and the relational activities that Dr. Wood spoke about that are so important. And for the students to be able to see that at work and happening, they see us as a team, but they also see our individual roles, right, and what each of us does for them and the group. And I just wanted to share some of our success rates at Mission. Quickly. In fall 17, in English 88, one level below freshman level English, before 705, the college-wide success rate in 88 was 60.9%. Pass rate for Latinx students college-wide, 60.2%. The Mission cohort, Puente, 81.4% success rate. And a 96% retention rate. In the spring of 2018, with English 1A, college-wide pass rate 61.2%, Latinx pass rate overall 55.1%, and for the Puente cohort, 76% success rate, and 100% retention. In fall of 18, this past semester, I don't have college-wide averages yet, but I will tell you that our cohort, 84% success rate, 92% retention rate. We are closing the gap. And I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Hi. There's a typo in my PowerPoint, so you get points if you find it. Anyway, I'm Jennifer Carlin. I'm the chair of the Behavioral Sciences Department. Behavioral Sciences is anthropology, psychology, and sociology. I teach psychology, and probably my most important role is that I teach. And I'm bringing forward a project that we did about a year. Did we finish about a year ago, Mitra? Is that when we started? That was an equity-funded project that we have called many different names because as we were going through it, we were trying to figure out why it was working. And so we sort of started out calling it the Stereotype Threat Project because that's what it was based on. And then we called it the Pen Pal Project, and then we called it the Mindset Project, and then we knew that it wasn't mindset that was working because we don't really believe in mindset. And then we called it something else. So for today, I'm referring to it as the Stereotype Threat Reduction Project, AKA the Pen Pal Project. And so for a while, we've been saying we needed to present this, we needed to talk about it because it was a highly successful project that we did in our department to address achievement gap. And we wanted to talk about it because was a very simple intervention on one level, but a very complex project that is really difficult to upscale. So in a way, I'm sort of presenting it to you to say, this really worked, and now we need to figure out what to do with the ideas about it. And so a little bit about just sort of me from the perspective of this. My training is in social clinical psychology. So my expertise is looking at the ways that society makes us mentally ill. And so I have that kind of view of things. Outside of City College, I am also the founder of the Laurel Center, which is a community mental health clinic here in San Francisco. And I'm a consultant on organizational psychology issues to corporations and nonprofits. And then inside of City College, I'm also on the Chancellor's Task Force for issues around support safety and removing barriers for queer and transgender students here. And then also in our department, we're doing a lot of different things regarding equity. We have a statistics course that we're super excited around the 705. Why do I think it's 703? It's 705 that we're super excited about and moving forward on. We've been involved in the food pantry efforts. I was one of the people that sort of started that. We have a food pantry in the department just running out of my office where we feed about 50 students a week. And then we just have a tiny little one there. So there's a lot of sort of things, little things like that we're involved in, but how we went about this project, I want to kind of talk about. I'm going to do something that I tell my students that I never do, which is that I'm going to give my opinion on things. When I'm in class, they'll say, well, do you think? And I sort of say, it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what does the data show, what do theorists show, and things like that. But I'm gonna give my opinion, and I'm also gonna theorize a little bit. And I decided on Monday, because you're presenting on Friday, so on Monday you should decide that you're gonna come up with some different theories about why we think this project worked, and what we could kind of do about it, which is this is what psychologists do all the time. We decide to just come up with a new idea and then present it before 100 people or something, and then see how it works. So I said to Cynthia, what was it? I'm your pasta and you guys are my wall, and we're going to see what sticks here with these ideas. But a lot of these ideas are actually just sort of a behavioral sciences look at some of the things that Dr. Wood has presented earlier. So nothing particularly new, just maybe another way of looking at what we did and maybe why it worked. I think it's important to thank people who have done both real labor and emotional labor to help get this project off the ground and have been talking to me about these ideas and helping to frame them. Dr. Lisa Harrison, who's a psychologist in our department, has spent a lot of time talking to me about these issues, both as a colleague and then also in preparing for today. Dr. Aaliyah, soon to be doctor, she's not a doctor yet, Aaliyah Dunn Saludin, who's the chair of African American Studies, Leslie Tinson, who's a psychologist in our department, Jesse Kolber, sociology, Elena Alvarado-Strasser in sociology, Jill Yee, who's the dean of behavioral sciences, social sciences, ethnic studies, social justice, was the person who got was the department chair of behavioral sciences before me, and got our equity committee going, asked me to be a part of that. That really got me out of my own passivity on the issue and got moving towards this project. And Catrice Jackson, she is an anti-racism and disarming weapons of whiteness teacher who I started studying with, and now I work with on a weekly and sometimes daily basis. She's actually located in Omaha, Nebraska, and I pay her as my anti-racism mentor and work with. And I say that not to say of my exceptionalism, but to say that I believe that that as a white person in a position of power, we need to constantly be working on our own anti-racism plan. Ms. Jackson says all the time that if you don't have a plan to be anti-racist, then you plan to. This just went out anyway, so. I said that if you don't have an anti-racism plan, then you plan to be racist. And being non-racist is not the same as being anti-racist, so it has to be an action and an activity. So Ms. Jackson and I work with her, as I said, on a weekly basis, but sometimes on a daily basis, to try to deal with my own racism, and particularly as a person in a position of power. On the project itself, I had two people that worked with it over 3 years. Dr. Rebecca Anchetta, who's a sociologist in the department, was in the beginning a student training coordinator, and she helped train the students who worked in the program. And then the last year of the program, Dr. Jennifer Monongo took over as the project lead, and so I wanted to be sure that I thanked them. The outline for this is that I want to talk about the history of the conception of this project and the key ideas, sort of how behavioral sciences in general looks at some of these ideas. And so I'll be talking about stereotype threat, I'll be talking about cognitive dissonance, and some of the things that Dr. Wood has already talked about, and maybe conceptualizing them for you from the way that we look at them in behavioral sciences. I'll describe what the project was that we did. I'll discuss our outcomes, which kind of surprised us because it was so successful, and then maybe some next steps about what we can do to work with this project. The overthinking psychologist. So when Dean Yee, then the department chair, approached me and said, you know, we need to be looking at achievement gap issues in our department, and I'd like you to be on this committee, we all started getting together and we all started overthinking the issue, because this is what behavioral scientists do. We get together and then we talk and we think and we begin to grind to an immediate halt. Because we start to deconstruct everything, and we process and we overprocess, and you know, I'm a psychologist who overprocesses, and then I'm queer and we overprocess everything, so there's a lot of overprocessing that goes on. So I'm going to share with you our overprocessing, because I think that the ideas are particularly helpful. But what we wanted to do was be intentional, because I think that what happens a lot is there'll sort of be these little efforts, you know, in departments. You know, somebody's going to do a little of this, and I'm doing a little of this, and then maybe we get together at department meetings and we talk about it, but we don't have an intentional plan. And so we sort of went through a process of rejecting ideas, saying what we didn't believe in. And behavioral sciences is good at this too. We list things and talk about what's wrong with them. I also want to show the perspective of the department, and that I think that our department has a unique position to address these issues. As psychologists, as sociologists, and as anthropologists, I think we stand in a good position to be able to examine these ideas. Understanding what causes these gaps is important. Etiology is important to understand then what you're going to do about your interventions. So we examined what we were already doing, and so we examined those high-impact practices. Hopefully you all know what the high-impact practices are, and you can even just go online and Google high-impact practices, and they come up. And we looked and we saw that many of us were doing some of that. And we also began to, after Jill Yee became the dean and I was appointed as department chair, I decided, well, we needed to start to look at how we were centering equity in our curriculum. So we have an in-house sort of equity curriculum kind of ad hoc committee where before any curriculum can move forward, we examine all of it to make sure that issues are being addressed in every single piece of curriculum that moves forward. And we began to also, with the help of one of our sociologists, Dr. Ramona Coates, who went to an equity training, brought to us a rubric for equity in syllabi. And so we began to look at things like this. And we also began to talk about things like, why is it that students that are in the most need of maybe support and help are often not the students that will do help-seeking behaviors? They may not seek out tutoring, or they may not feel comfortable coming to office hours, or may ghost us, as the young kids say, right? And so we talked about things like microaggressions. We talk about students feeling alienated in the classroom. And then we talked about, but how do we force faculty to begin to address potentially their own internalized bias? We can't actually do that. So how are we going to address all this? the behavioral sciences, we have some of these base ideas. And one of them is that all institutions in the United States were built in white supremacy. So white supremacy is the core of every institution. That means that education is then centered in and seated within white supremacy. So then any kind of achievement gap that we have was created by us, right? By this white supremacist institution. And so then reform is just trying to tweak a broken institution. And so we can spin out on that for a really long time. We can sit around and talk about that for a really long time and get absolutely nowhere. And then educators are really just agents of transmission of problematic social norms. And then that's just reality, that we are in a way continuing to transmit these very problematic social norms. That, and that's even unwittingly, even if we're trying not to, we're just continuing to transmit what are fairly toxic social norms. So unless we're centering our curriculum and our programs on the experiences of Black and brown students, unless we're centering our programs around Black and brown faculty, and I say Black and brown because that's really what we're talking about, and particularly in my department, that's where the gap lies, then we're just kind of continuing to perpetuate a white supremacist system. This is what we talked about, and this is what we talk about. But at the same time, we're not gonna blow up the institution. So what do? How do we solve the problem without dismantling the entire system? Education is a structural system. All systems service white supremacy. How do we address a gap caused by the educational system? We cause this. But sometimes there's almost an essentialism. We act as though students arrive to us essentially less than, right? As though they were born less than. And really, it's not true, right? These students were created to be struggling by the system. So what are we gonna do? And then there's the issue of cognitive dissonance, which was a bit, I think, what Dr. Wood was talking about. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological stress. It's the mental discomfort that is experienced by people who hold two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values. And this discomfort is triggered by a situation in which a person's beliefs clashes with a new evidence perceived by the person. So I think or feel one way, and then I'm perceived by something else. I'm a good person. And then you tell me that I have done something or said something hurtful or harmful to you, and I can't sort of rectify those two things. There are a variety of ways of coping. So one of the things, and I want to sort of read you this, Black and brown students striving may be thwarted by instructors in the past because their achievements may be seen as unexpected, right? What you were talking about. We have seen situations in the press where Black and brown students' work has been seen as falsified or plagiarized because scores were seen as too high or the work too good. On unconscious levels, faculty can be directly sabotaging Black and brown student success when students' achievement exceeds our expectation. This form of coping with emotional discomfort we call cognitive dissonance. We expect our students to live up or live down to our statistical placements of them. We expect this not because we're lousy people, but because we've all been socialized into a system of injustice. I think it's a constant journey to try to disentangle ourselves from the system who's created these barriers to access, barriers to achievement, and train to see superiority in a few and not the many. Higher achieving Black and brown students are oftentimes seen as a surprise. They're specialized, exceptionalized, and creating a performance burden on them. What are deemed as supportive comments by faculty can be experienced as pressure and infantilized. Wow, you're so smart. You're so articulate. You're so well groomed, I heard a faculty member say. We needed to create a project where exceptionalism was the norm, where it was just going to be a given. And we were trying to figure out how to do that. And how do we address that cognitive dissonance? And I thought every time we look at these achievement gap data, we're unconsciously setting students into statistical expectations. And then we're surprised when they do better. It's a complex spiral. I actually call it a shit spiral, but we won't say that here. Because I have to look at the achievement gap data to understand it, but as a psychologist, I know that the more that I look at it, the more that I may unconsciously be holding students down. It's a shit spiral. So this is what behavioral scientists do. We talk about this and then get stuck, right? Is it an achievement gap, or is it just a grade gap? Right? That's another question. Is it really an achievement gap? Is it a difference in grades, or is it a difference in learning? Have we talked to our students to find out if they're not learning the material or if they're just not getting the grades? That's a really big difference. How do we change this issue without acknowledging the role of individual instructor racism and instructors being early in their own personal, what's called racial identity development, which was developed by someone named Cross. Also, white identity development was something brought up by someone named Helms. We talk about attachment theory, someone by the name of John Bowlby, the way that when people have secure attachment, how it changes everything. We talk about their internal working model that then I bring to every relationship that I have. And when I have a secure internal working model to education, then I can go to my teacher, walk into their office, and have a predetermined idea that they're probably gonna treat me well. And if I go to that teacher and they treat me poorly, I think they're probably just a jerk. But if I have an internal working model that the education system is against me and then they treat me poorly, I can give up on the entire system, right? So attachment theory basically states that we have secure attachment through something called proximity maintenance, which is where literally just being physically close. In education, I see that as regular contact. You know, having instructors who know who you are and say hi to you and have regular contact with you. On Sunday, I was in a bar, which is very weird for me, just so everybody knows. But it was the new gay bar in town. They have a drag show on Sunday mornings. Who knew, right? So being old-ish, and some friends said, let's go. We have to support this as part of our culture. I said, okay. So we go. They have really good brunch, by the way. It's Jolene's down on 16th. So anyway, and so I'm there, and all of a sudden there's this young person going. I said, I'm your teacher. She's like, holy shit. I'm like, I know, right? Fuck, I'm like, I know. I exist in time and space. She's like, you're here, like in a bar. And I'm like, I know. And the weird thing was there's a room there called the boob room, and I was standing in the boob room at the time. It was all very uncomfortable, but, needless to say, right, so then she wanted to hug me, she wanted to introduce me to all of her friends. Right, queer people are equity groups, right? We don't have all the data yet, but if you look at national data, they drop out at really high rates. So, having connection, being real people and being connected, proximity maintenance, whether it's online, whether it's through Canvas, whether it's seeing people in the hall, whether it's saying hi, just being real people. My students, I told them I was doing this, and they voted on what shoes I should wear. My students are obsessed with my shoe collection. They picked these. They're the color of City College, so they liked them. The other thing with attachment is safe haven. Do students feel like they can come to us when they have something bad happen? And it's not the bad of just your class, right? Do they feel like they can come when something bad happens and they know that there's a place where they can come and come to your office and just hang out and take a moment and take a breath about all the stuff that's going on in their life? And the last one really is secure base. That you're a place where they can go and expand outwards into the world and return to you. You get emails from those old students, here's what I'm doing when I'm at Berkeley, here's what I'm doing when I'm at San Francisco State, here's what I'm doing at UC San Diego. Just a plug, yeah. Right? You're a safe base that exists for me even when I'm gone from here. You're a safe base when I'm taking a class that's not your class. Right? When you see that stuff, then you know that students have attachment, and there's tons of research on attachment, right? And how positive that is. How do we develop that with each and every student that we have? And when faculty tell me I don't have time, I don't have patience for that. I don't think it's that hard, actually. Is it an achievement gap or is it an opportunity gap? Right? Linda Darling Hammond wrote about opportunity gap is the disparity in access to quality schools and the resources needed to be academically successful. So is it an achievement gap or is it an opportunity gap? Deficit-based interventions. So often we do deficit-based interventions. We look at students as being less than. They need tutoring. They need remediation. They need the prerequisites. They are the problem. We created this problem as a system, and now they have to fix it by doing extra work, extra tutoring, extra classes. It's a deficit-based model. Priming. Priming is a psychological concept that is very well researched and across the board that looks at how very small things set in motion, and Dr. Wood mentioned it, set in motion people's sort of psychological approach to things. And so one thing was that when women take math tests, if they take it in a room with other women, they score 70% higher on the test. And if they take it in a room with men, they score significantly lower on the test. Scores of like, and I know this because I teach a gender class, so these are the statistics that are closer to my head, but if women take tests in classrooms with famous women on the wall, they do significantly better on math tests than if they take tests in rooms with men on the walls, right? And you brought up the other pictures. It's the same sort of thing. Very subtle things about looking at our spaces. They found that women engineering students did better when they were in rooms without pictures of Star Trek. As a Trekkie, I'm a little upset by that, but anyway, right? So, yeah. Looking at things just like we talked about this, things like, you know, having a transgender awareness flag up, right? What is that? How does that speak to students, right? Having pictures of people that maybe look like people. We also talked about like things like the marshmallow test. How many of you know the famous marshmallow test, right? Which you know has been debunked, right? So the marshmallow test was that you gave a kid a marshmallow, you left the room, and you said, look, if you don't eat this marshmallow in a certain amount of time, I'll come back and I'll give you a second marshmallow. And what they found was on this sort of longitudinal study that the kids that didn't eat the second marshmallow were more likely to graduate high school, were more likely to go to college, were less likely to engage in deviant behaviors and all these kinds of things. And the kids that couldn't refrain from eating that marshmallow were less likely to do well in all these other ways. And then we said, well, wait a minute. Maybe there's really important reasons to eat that marshmallow. right? Like, you may not know if you're really going to get that second marshmallow. Maybe there's reasons not to trust the authority is going to give you that second marshmallow. Maybe you need the first marshmallow now. You know, and what they found was it was really about an issue not so much about children having internal, self-control, but it was more about socioeconomic status of the children, immigration status of the children. So once again, we've been using all this data to show, well, kids just need more self-control. It's a very white-based idea, right, of self-control and not about things like socioeconomic status, immigration status, a basic feeling of security that the world is a good place and is going to treat you equally. And we also talked about Carol Dweck's ideas of mindset, right, which is very popular among people in the English department. Mindset is deeply problematic. And I can get into you with that for a lot of ways. But even Carol Dweck, who I appreciate her as a scientist in some ways because she's acknowledged a lot of the problems and also has said that many people misunderstand her work and use it in a very superficial kind of way. But mindset has some real problems. I really encourage people to read From Achievement Gap to Education Debt by Gloria Ladson-Billings, and also to read Grit is in Our DNA, Why Teaching Grit is Inherently Anti-Black by Dr. Bettina Love. And I want to read you something from that. A lot of people are very much into grit, right? And you guys have all heard about grit before, right? These ideas of perseverance and these cognitive things. Again, it very much relies on the idea that the student is the problem and that they need to just develop these new internal strategies instead of looking at the fact that we have a system and that we have instruction that is inherently problematic. But she says in this article, but what if your long-term goal is fighting to live, fighting racism? Is 400 years long enough? You cannot measure this type of grit, nor should you ignore it. African Americans are resilient and gritty because we have to be to survive. But it is misleading, naive, and dangerous to remove our history on both sides of the water from the conversation about grit. Both grit and mindset are problematic as neither address the forms of learned helplessness and experiences of this is me, not her, sorry. Grit and mindset are problematic as neither address the forms of learned helplessness and experiences of avolition, which basically means lack of motivation, that are at the heart of fixed mindset and non-grit. Students are punished for not being better at accommodating to oppression. So then I became department chair and I realized I couldn't just sit around and talk about all the problems anymore. And this is what happens when an overthinker becomes the leader. And I began to look at transformative models, and they combine this social critique with ways of doing student empowerment. But I still think that they miss the piece of holding people accountable for their individual racism. The reason why I decided to pursue this stereotype threat intervention, because A, it's a non-deficient model, and it had more immediate impact. We need to do things now, and we need to do things for the long run. And it also addresses to some degree the nature of the unconscious. I am a clinical psychology person, so I want to understand the unconscious. So some of you understand the unconscious mind, but the unconscious mind is a part of your mind that you are unaware of. And if you think you know your unconscious mind, you don't, because once it's unconscious. So, but think about the unconscious mind as like the stars during the daytime. They're always there, they're always operating, but you can't see them. How many of you know stereotype threat a little bit? Okay, so I'll go into it some, but Claude Steele, and he also worked with Joshua Aronson. I ended up calling Aronson during this project in New York and had a conversation with him about what I was doing. He actually answered his phone, which surprised me. I also used stereotype threat because I'm a huge fanboy of stereotype threat. So we don't call it research in psychology, we call it me-search, which is just, you end up just doing whatever it most turns you on. But so Claude Steele developed this, which is that negative stereotypes exist about a group that you identify with, okay? And you know those stereotypes, okay? And then you're in a situation where you're invested in the outcome, and the stereotype is applicable in that situation, so then it's threatening to you. So I know, I will use a personal example that I use in class. My undergraduate degree is in a physical science. I was the only person in my program, including professors at the time, that was perceived to be a woman. So there were no students and there were no faculty. I know the stereotypes about women and math and science, and I was very aware of that. And I felt the threat to need to not live up to the stereotype. So the idea is that you're aware of the stereotype and you don't want to live up to that stereotype, so you feel this pressure. I felt the pressure to succeed as a woman in a, quote, non-traditional field. And this was in the 80s. So there was just zero representation. And the threat causes anxiety. And that leads to you actually fulfilling the stereotype because you have lowered performance. And they've done lots of different studies on this, including neuroscience studies about what happens in the brain. People have a more difficult time with executive functioning. People have a more difficult time with focus and concentration. There's all kinds of things that go on. And they've even showed things like self-consciousness and, quote, guilty behavior that looks like guilty behavior. So, for instance, an African-American man is pulled over by the police. He's aware of the stereotypes against African-American men and criminality, and he doesn't want to act as though he's a criminal, which may cause him to become anxious and then act in ways that seem suspicious. Okay, that's stereotype threat. The story that I tell my students is that I was in a particularly difficult course that was required for my major. It had to do with computer programming of satellites that read landforms. In those days, remember Cobalt? You had to use all those punch cards. Is anybody old enough to remember that, right? So I'm in this class. I'm the only identified woman in the class, and I'm failing the class. And I cannot ask for help. If I ask for help, then it's going to reaffirm to everybody that women can't do this. All the men in my cohort were wonderful. They were wonderful to me. I was very close to them, but there's no way that I can let them know that I am failing. My car breaks down one day, and my friend Cletus offers to give me a ride. And I'm like, can you give me a ride? Yes, yes, yes. We're driving home, and Cletus turns to me and says, I feel really bad, but the guys and I got together, and can you tutor us in that class? And I'm like, what? And he's like, we're all failing, and you're the only one who isn't staying after school. You're the only one not asking for help, so you must be doing good, right? And I'm like, Cletus, I'm failing the class. And he's like, what? He's like, well, you're never staying late. You're never asking for help. You're not going to the open lab time. Does that sound like any students that you know, right? Yeah, I can't go. I can't go because if I go, then I'm showing that I'm carrying the world's women, right, on my shoulders to prove, because if I don't pass this class, then I'm going to be an English major. Nothing wrong with English majors. I've dissed English majors now twice. I'm going to find a dead Shakespeare book in my car. Yeah, but, right, I'm going to prove, right, that, women can't do this. I'm crying, He's very uncomfortable because he's a, science guy. And I just said, he said, what are you talking about? He said, we have a study group, and so then we realize all of us are failing. Maybe this is a problem with the class. And we go and we talk to the professor who doesn't care. We go to talk to the dean who intervenes, and, we all pass the class. Had I not had my car break down, I would have dropped out. I would have dropped. Because I could not have passed that class. That's stereotype threat, and that's how profound that is. The original research between Steele and Aronson was that they took equally matched students, and they took high school students, and this has been one of the most widely, there's over 300 kinds of research on this. We've looked at gender, we've looked at race and ethnicity, we've looked at age, so people who are older who think that they can't remember anything when they get older, which is not accurate, all kinds of things, and they've looked at this. But the original research, they took equally matched high school students. They used only boys at that time because they didn't want gender to be a confounding variable. And these were honors students. They took black and white students. And they had them take the graduate record exam. So a test that would be too difficult for them. And they basically were going to be comparing scores, but they sort of primed them for whether or not they were being tested and compared by race. It's kind of this is a very short version of the whole test. And when they told the black students that their scores were essentially going to be compared by race, they got one score. And when they told the students, when they reassured them that this was sort of not based on that, they got completely different scores. And you can guess which were higher, right? When they were sort of assured that this was not about that, they got one score, and when they were under the pressure that they had to sort of prove that African American students could do it, their scores plummeted. We've seen the same thing when we did this against women, against men with math, and all these kinds of things. So this is stereotype threat. One of the reasons why I really liked this research is because we found that when people simply learn about stereotype threat, it actually helps them to do better. So it's really rare that learning about something actually changes behavior. It's really rare. I like it when people say, well, we just need more education. And I'm like, education doesn't change behavior all that much, But stereotype threat education does seem to change behavior. Just simply teaching students around stereotype threat does seem to help reduce stereotype threat. So I thought, okay, this is a good thing. This is a chart that sort of shows how stereotype works. Okay. You get distracted, self-conscious, you evaluate yourself, apprehension, test anxiety, loss of motivation, and then it interferes with performance. So every one of our classrooms is a stereotype threat-inducing situation. So the origin of the project that we did, I'm finally getting to our project, is that I found this article called Reducing Effects of Stereotype Threat on African American College Students by Shaping Theories of Intelligence. Joshua Aronson, Freed, and Good. And they used mindset as, Carol Dweck's mindset work is kind of the heart of the project. I don't think that actually had anything to do with why the project worked. They think it did. I don't think that's why. My alternative theory has to sort of do with this idea, this psychological idea of introjects. Introjects, I was running around the other day going, I need a psychoanalyst. Where's Margaret Louis? But anyway, who's sitting here now? So introjects is a psychological term for how individuals internalize fragments of relationships and their surrounding world. It's seen as a way to stabilize my internal world when my relationships or the social contexts are absent of authentic support. So when I don't have a positive relationship with someone, I'll internalize them. When the world is not supportive of me, I internalize it more, which seems not so great. It's not a great idea necessarily. It's kind of the parent inside of you, that negative voice in your head. So I'm sort of saying that stereotype threat is a form of an introject. And the more that we have these negative social voices, the more that we're going to absorb that internally. It's a self-stabilizing way to cope. It's a way to cope with social injustice, with institutional barriers, and the constant microaggressions. I'm going to internalize more, as a way to stay stable and to not go crazy. I'll take it. There's your typo. Sorry. Mourning is a big thing that we talk a lot about in clinical psychology. Mourning, the sorrow, the questioning, and the anger that comes from the loss of an ideal. To get rid of an introject, one has to mourn. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that when we allow students and we help students to mourn the idea of a meritocracy, to mourn the idea of social justice existing, to mourn the idea that this system is lacking of barriers to them. I think when teachers say, if you just work hard, what do I have to do to be successful in your class? You just have to work hard. That's not true, necessarily. You have to work hard and put up with my potential microaggressions and those that are about to be said by your students. And you're going to have to put up with, the fact that when you go to the library, they may not notice that you exist, and you're going to have to, right? When we really are honest with students about the system, then they stand on firm ground, mourn that, are less likely to absorb the introject, and can move forward. That's my theory. We need to stop lying about the white supremacist nature of our institutions and of ourselves. The inability to mourn the failed relationship increases the likelihood of developing internal introjects. Maria Torok. So our project, 45 minutes later, is that we took CCSF students in behavioral sciences classes, 200 a semester, 7 or 8 classes. We trained some student trainers, 2 or 3 a semester. We had them attend classes and learn about Carol Dweck's mindset approach. It was just an organizing principle, a way to sort of go about it. That really fell apart very quickly, and it really became kind of a different kind of training. But we then connected with a charter school in San Francisco. I used a charter school because it was too hard to get through the SFUSD system to get them to agree. So just went with a charter school, and I asked them to connect each one of my 200 students with a pen pal at the middle school. Each CCSF student in the class was then paired with a middle school student from the local charter school, anonymously. They only got first names, things like that. All the students were given the social role of an expert. All CCSF students were seen as equally experts. So often, mentors and tutors are volunteers that have to opt in. They're chosen. Do you want to be a volunteer? Oh, you're smart, you're good, you can be a mentor. In this case, everybody was a mentor. Everybody was an expert. Everybody was a teacher. You had to opt out. Okay? You had to opt out. So we had every student be trained in how to do mindsets, sort of, some version of that. The middle schoolers wrote letters first as a writing project in their school that included some kind of academic struggle they were having, some kind of problem they were having, a barrier to their success. We then got the letters and we screened them for anonymous stuff and anything that might reveal who the student was. We had to code them, and then we distributed them to CCSF students. Just to say, like, from an organizational perspective, this is a nightmare project. okay? And I'm not, this is not a pity party moment, but I run a fairly large department. I have about 40 faculty. I don't have any classified, and I was running this on my own. So it was really a lot, right? And so I did have student workers to help, but it was huge. We wrote a manual on how to do this. It's gigantic. The CCSF students then wrote reply letters, right, to the students. Students got so into this. They loved writing these letters. They got so engaged with their student. They wanted to learn about them, know about them, and they wrote back. The student trainers and faculty assisted the students in writing their letters. I don't know what to say. They're having problems at home. They're having problems here. And we said to them, share with them your own barriers. Share with them your own problems that you're having. Let's admit the reality, right? The introjects, right? Admit the reality. Share with them your struggles and share with them what you have done. You're an expert, right? So we did that. The letters were then screened again for appropriateness. I'm very proud of our students. We only had one student do something inappropriate and all the time. And then they were returned to the middle schooler. And we told them, find something in common with them, connect with them. The process of training, letter writing, and exchange happened 3 times every semester. Back and forth, back and forth. The amount that our students got committed to this universally surprised me. Students that were absent the day of the letter writing would come to my office and say, can I find my letter? Can I write my student? I couldn't be there that day. Students would bring stickers and say, I want to put stickers on my letter. Can I put a sticker on my letter? Students would draw things to give to their. And we promised faculty it would take 15 minutes out of their class. It would take the whole class. Which didn't always make us popular. We started to notice how the success was going, and we found by the last year that our rates of success across the board were great, but our Latinx students weren't having as much of success. So then we decided, what if we had some Spanish language? I consulted with some people, and they said, well what if some of the letters were in Spanish? Would there be more of a resonant experience? So we started to do some letters in Spanish between people. After the second year, we began to run into problems with the middle school. They weren't feeling like it was fitting their needs. It was also just a lot of work for them. They would promise letters to me by a certain time, but they would have stuff happen at school and they wouldn't get the letters done in time. And then I spent a lot of time driving back and forth between, us and the middle school. And so the third year, we ended up changing it that the students were writing to first-year college students, and we ended up using the students in my research methods class as the people that were writing them back. So it changed it, and that creates the really interesting issues around our deception, and it was just a lot that we had to sort of talk through. But that's when we started using Spanish language letters, because I had Spanish-speaking and Spanish-writing students in my research methods class, and so they began to write students in Spanish. And then we could go to some of our students and say, hey, we've got Spanish language-only students. Would you be willing to write to them in Spanish? Which valued their language skills, This was at the beginning of the new administration when there was a huge, really violent attacks around immigration. So a lot of students felt really excited that their second language was valued. So in review, it was these 3 training sessions, 3 letters exchanged, a manual was developed, and there was changes in process over time to try to streamline it to make it less of an overwhelming kind of process. Results, we compared rates by course CRN. So we were able to go to research and planning and get rates by course CRN. We compared the CRNs of participating classes against non-participating classes within the department. We compared CRNs of participating to non-participating of the same instructor. So some instructors let us come into some classes and not other classes. We tried to pick classes that were our bottleneck classes, but also we just had to have faculty who would be willing to volunteer. And in one semester, we were able to compare the same course content of a participating and non-participating instructor. So it was the exact same class, but I'll say this, I'm gonna show you some of the overview data. We had lots more data, but as some of you know, Batmail had a huge flood, and the big nightmare of every researcher, my computer was destroyed and all my files, so we've lost a ton of data. I know. So we could redo this. We had so much aggregated and disaggregated data on this that just showed the levels that this was working. I'll show you the overview data. The success rates of African American Latino students in participating classes increased by 2 standard deviations to an average success rate of 74%. The combined success rate of the entire department prior to the intervention was 73%. So we increased success by 2 standard deviations, which was shockingly successful. The success rates of all students increased, and then the success, so basically we eliminated the achievement gap. And we were particularly successful with African American students and a less success rate with our Latinx students. And that's where the achievement gap is in my department. So we didn't particularly look at other groups. We are attempting to kind of go back and reconstruct some of that data, and we've been in communication. Do we ever find if we have more of that, Mitra? We're still looking. We're still working on constructing a lot of this data for us. But yeah, we lost everything, which is, anybody who's ever done research, that is your biggest, that's what you wake up in the middle of the night stressing about. So we reject the mindset explanation as being the reason why this worked. We do accept the saying is believing explanation, which is that an individual will remember and believe a position or idea when they explain it to another. So having these students write to the middle school students saying, yes, there are barriers, yes, there are difficulties, but you can still persist and do well. We believe that that worked. We also believe that this was about attachment and connection. We believe that it was about stop making individual students seem exceptional and making everyone exceptional. Everyone was a knower. Everyone was an expert. It reduced stereotype threat through this idea of, let me kind of come back to that because I know I only have a few minutes, but being seen as an expert mentor and tutor without having to prove it. It was an assumption. Everybody in this class is good enough, right? And it was in a disruption of stereotypes. We had engagement and caring and connection going on in the classroom. And we had mourning of the reality of struggles. So we were acknowledging and allowing the students to acknowledge there are barriers, right? There are difficulties. I find that too often instructors are trying to just be positive. You can do this. Instead of acknowledging that there are problems and barriers that get in the way. And the letters that these students were writing back to their middle school students were discussing all of the problems and barriers that get in their way. It's acknowledging the reality instead of taking the colorblind approach or the all lives matter approach and just use that wherever that says that no, there aren't any problems. Just work hard and you're going to be okay. The faculty valued and saw students as teachers, right, instead of the stereotype. And the faculty allowed all students to be acceptable in low stakes ways. And that was assumed instead of being seen as surprising, right? We think that's partially why that worked. I think that's why it worked. Students have to find meaning in our classes, no matter what that class is. Dr. Bettina Love talks about this when she was talking about grit, that perseverance comes with passion. And so students found passion in this exercise. We had an almost zero dropout rate of students who were participating in the Pen Pal project. They wanted to be there. What day are you going to write the letter? I want to be sure that I'm there. Existential psychology discusses the importance of psychological meaning from connecting to creative, transcendent, experiential values. You know, finding meaning in a course is not a curriculum content, right? So how do we connect students to meaning through what we're doing in the class and what the activities are? This exercise, many faculty said, well, I don't want you to come in. I mean, I like the project, but it's not related to my curriculum. We're not Tupperware where we pop open the lid and we pour content in and then we close the lid again, right? We're trying to set this fertile ground for them to learn, for people to learn and to want to learn. And I think also students really enjoyed having their teachers, want to work with them on something that wasn't just for a grade. The problems with the project is that it was unsustainable, the amount of the work and the complexity to it, and it's not scalable. To be writing pen pals for 80,000 students, not really, but. So those are the ideas that were worked. I have 1 minute. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts? I know you said no questions, but yeah. Oh, Carol Dweck did this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, And so instead of saying that, I'm not good at math, it's saying I am not good at math now. I can get better at math. I think it's deeply problematic. Yeah. And so what we did was when we were teaching them initially how to write the letters, we taught them sort of that as just an organizing principle. But there's a lot of privilege involved in this idea. It's also sort of this idea that again, the system created these problems and then we just want the students to think differently and it'll solve the problem. And it abdicates our responsibility for systemic change. Yeah. Anybody? Okay, I'll get see you. Bye.